And then in looking at what researchers have looked at, just why self-harm might be in the mix to the extent of suicide. And it includes like lower levels of education, and education is all about inducing knowing. That's the root of the word. The etymology is about inducing knowing within ourselves. And the identity association model is all about inducing the greatest form of knowing, which is knowing ourselves. And then taking the time to really learn how to skillfully navigate injuries that are a byproduct of any service years, that can really help to reduce the inclination to self-harm or try to end one's life. And then this just speaks to, again, reiterating the 5 years of doing in speaking to you and your peers in various branches. I know some of you don't want to be identified as being at all related to other branches. But the psychologists say, again, that the disconnection from self is the very definition of trauma itself, which I thought was so amazing, because it's so easy in this whirlwind of a world to get caught up in everything other than what's taking place on our own home front. So this again introduces the identity association model and the intention of creating greater ease for the transition by providing a sense of structure, which is more self-relational in those times of feeling lost or disconnected from the self.
Yeah.
Any wondering from your mind?
So it's interesting. We're seeing a transition right now of soldiers and veterans as well. You know, from 2000 to, I'd say, roughly 2018 or so, the issue of transitioning was, like you said, there was the self-identification and not having that group, combined with, you know, these soldiers were having issues finding jobs, which then led to stress of not having money, which then left stress in their home, and it was just a trickle effect. Now, it was kind of a blessing and a curse. So COVID happens, right? And obviously from 2019 to about 2021, late 2021, we saw a lot of isolation, because we were told to isolate, and these guys they got comfortable in their isolation. They got very comfortable in their isolation. But with that being said, though, just like in most areas, there is a lot of work out there to be had. And so as much as they were self-isolating in their downtime, a lot of these guys became employed. And so their interactions were at work only, but it was getting them out of the house as far as this is what I've seen, in some of the organizations that I work with have seen as well. And things have been going fairly well since 21 into 2024. Like I said, a lot of these guys, they're holding down much more, I would say, careers instead of jobs. Right. You know, these guys, you know, used to be working $12 an hour jobs, and now they're working, you know, $25 to $30 an hour careers, you know, so they're building families and things like that. And so it's all good things. But now we have this really interesting group that's getting out of the Army right now. So those who joined in 2018 to now, and they're getting out. What I'm seeing with the younger soldiers is that even after being in the military, they never really experienced failure. And so they're struggling in their transition because they're failing. They having to establish a job on their own, or having to establish, you know, putting a roof over their head, things like that. And they're not doing as well as they thought. And so we're seeing a little bit of an issue there. But
may I just confirm what I'm hearing you say is that self-initiative is so new, in that before it was like, if you fail, it's because somebody gave you a task, you fail, and it's like, I was like totally devoted to doing it. Obviously, I'm in service to this branch. However, it wasn't like an idea that was coming from oneself that then was put forth into the world and then fails. That's a way different dynamic.
Well, it's interesting. The way we talk to our service members now is very, very different than what we talked to them, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We, as leaders, we talk to them with a kind of an open mind and open heart, and it's just a little different. It's not necessarily a bad thing in some ways, but it's just a little different. And so when we approach these soldiers about their failures of their tasks, I don't feel like they're necessarily taking it to heart. And so they might fail and fail again. And so it's just this repetitive thing until it gets worked out. And that's one thing that's one thing we're really trying to work on in the service is figuring out how we can get through soldiers, but also build them up at the same time. Because some of the interesting readings I have, so we've often heard about helicopter parents, right?
Oh, yes.
So it's very hovering stuff. Well, what we're seeing now, which is really, really weird, is I either called bulldozer or snowplow parents, depending on where you live, where these parents aren't accepting the fact that their kids are failing. And so college professors are getting more phone calls from parents now these days because their kid is not doing well in their class. And they think that their kid should be getting a better grade, et cetera. You and I, going through our lives, I would be embarrassed. Like if my parents called my college professor, that was unheard of when I was in college. But it's happening so much more. And so unfortunately, when we get some of these soldiers and service members in the military, they don't know what failure is, and we can't just throw failure at them right off the bat if they've never experienced it before. And so it's a growing process. And so those soldiers or service members are doing their whatever contract is, and they're just getting out. We're not seeing a lot of longevity in these contracts as much as we used to, but that's a whole nother thing. But
yes, retention. Yes.
Yeah.
I have noticed, because when I first started this work of interviewing, it was 2018 from my tiny house in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And some of these people, they were really young, and now they're out. And I actually have one joining me next week for this session. So that's going to be interesting because he's one of those people, and I would love to hear what he says. It's just a godsend that you're bringing this to our attention, because he's kind of a byproduct of something. We don't know. I mean, maybe he never planned to stay in. Maybe it's just such a nicety to go, oh, really? I can join the military. And if all goes well, I get out in 4 years, and then I get my home and I get my university paid for. So it's sort of like a quick fix for wanting a more viable life or lifestyle. Quick question. You said that you've been working with some groups, military support groups. Do you want to give them a shout out, or are they more in the making and less fully formed?
No. I mean, we can talk about them all day. So
just the names, because then we can look them up. People who are watching this, and then myself as well.
Yeah. So one of the bigger ones, and a lot of service members are aware of Vet Center, which is a branch of the VA. They specialize in counseling. They're really great. I spoke with the people at MACB, which is the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans. They specialize in employment and housing and legal services for service members. And we've talked with them about the things that they've seen in the last few years. Talked with the Operation 23-0, which is a Midwest-based, Minnesota-based organization, nonprofit that their main goal is to stop suicide. And they originally started with raising awareness of veteran suicide, but at this point in time, it's pretty prevalent of what the situation is. And so now it's more of just prevention. So, but yeah, I talk with a lot of them all the time. And then also, I have my project of Veteran Outdoor Adventures, where we take service members on guided hunting and fishing trips. And a lot of these times, these guys open up and they talk about their experiences and some of the issues they've had since they got out of the military. And yeah, so they're all great groups. And I know that I could list them all day long, but
I know, because I researched, Travis, and there's 40,000 nonprofits that support the military. Hence why analysis paralysis, feeling overwhelmed by the transition process, and you, the greater you, the vast you, everyone in the boots of transition, really having a friendly voice, making it more of an approachable subject that is more of a mirror of what is actually happening, which is we're all just human beings. If we were in the shoes of, if I had gotten through boot camp, which a 20-year-old girl had, she was on here yesterday, and just cute as pie. I think that I would definitely appreciate the friendly voice that you're offering right now, that accessibility and that increasing of accessibility, bringing it more to social media is such a godsend, comparatively to like dry. I mean, everybody in the transition inquiries that I did during those 5 years said, "Oh, death by PowerPoint." I'm like, what do you mean by that? Oh, it's just, there's no interaction, there's no questions, there's no ability to contribute. It's just kind of flipping through slides and everyone's falling asleep at their desk or table and just wants to go. So it's like the intent is there. The military branches have the intent, as the Army has clearly expressed and maximized like amazing innovation that we're seeing now. However, just to continuously have that showing up of creating more inquiry, space for contribution, so that people are actually getting online in the frontal lobe versus being distanced from the information and falling asleep at the desk, like they reported.
Internally, I mean, within the branches of service, there are tons of resources. I mean, there are tons. Now, do all those resources try to go to these transitional opportunities to teach them? Absolutely. I know they do, because they come to our unit all the time, teach us about credentialing assistance that's offered and teach us about finance and so on and so forth. And so they do come, and they don't just do PowerPoint. So, but what I have found is I think there's a lot of deflecting there in some cases, because I know the opportunities are given, and nonprofits know this too. Like you said, the 40,000 veteran nonprofits know this too. There's a lot of them that have tons of money and services, and they have it and they're willing to give it. And they reach out and let these service members or veterans know they can only lead these horses to water. They can't force their head into the water and make it drink it. So like, same thing with the military services that are offered. They let them know, not just via, PowerPoint, but there's ultimately still some responsibility on the service member to at least take some action, and I think that that's kind of the hard part. Is there's so many things where, as a lot of service members experience, they get signed up for things. It's the work is already done. They come to them, their chain of command comes to them with a piece of paper and says, sign this and it'll get you signed up for this, and so on and so forth. Where a lot of these programs are like, hey, you need to come see us, or we can meet you halfway or wherever it be and sign you up for this stuff, but you got to do this little bit of work and then we'll give you all this money. And that's the thing we've learned, is that these people, they just have a hard time putting that little bit of work, because they're so used to being almost spoon fed and handholding to like get them through that door. So
So
it's
I concur 100%, Travis, in that there needs to be self-initiative, and anchoring that self-initiative or that sense that one can impact one's own life can feel like a distant dream when one's adhering to a schedule uncreated by them most of the times, more times than not, within those service hours. Being an ex-naval spouse, I was surprised the lack of sleep that so many people, I mean, especially that he was getting 24-hour shift. Wasn't just a 24-hour shift, it was 36 hours, because he'd go in at 5 and then he would not come back until the end of the next day. So that's more like a 36-hour shift. And then trying to go to sleep after being so wired. I know from my own experience as a human being, like when I'm wired and I've just neglected sleep, it's hard to then shut it down, my system, and go, okay, now it's time to sleep. Because I've neglected that sleep, and that's a rarity for me. I have no reason to stay up all night long. I'm a 9 to 10 p.m.er. That's when I like to, that's you live and learn. Especially with the post-traumatic stress brain, not having sleep can create such a distance from even reality itself. It can put all sorts of things out of whack. And I heard you talk about the chain of command coming and saying, sign this, come and join this. And then I heard, I think it was just an example, but if you do this, we'll give you this money. But I think that was just an analogy, or you're speaking to a second component of something. In the beginning, what I heard was yes, the chain of command coming around and saying, sign up for this. And that's the whole point, is that when going and leaving the post and or the actual whole role of being a service member, transitioning to civilian. So it could be just like a post change, which I think is tremendously remarkable, that service members go from one post to the other in such a short amount of time without a lot of, not too much decompression, sometimes 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks, in my experience as a prior naval spouse, the 2 weeks, a lot of it was just packing up everything in the house, driving, getting more stuff, collecting things from family's house. But the whole time was basically consumed in just like the generalities of like the checklist of moving. So there wasn't a lot of decompression time. But point in case is that having mandatory stuff like the R2R that the Army's already doing, that's the direction that I think everybody wants to see. Everybody wants to see, rather than sign your name here, hey, you, in order to actually get off this base and leave your uniform behind or whatever, I'm sure they take them with them, but if not, in order to actually detach permanently, you need to come in. You need to come in and you need to do this experiential training, and no one's singing Kumbaya, because this work is challenging. This self-analysis, self-assessment work, especially within this proposed tool that I've been working with, and I'm working with just the identity association model for transition, or the IAM for transition. It kind of works with the things that we're seeing on these slides, like, first of all, acknowledging what everyone's done. And sometimes it's like, if you're service member to service member, it might be easy to forget what those people who are discharging or detaching permanently from their service have actually done, because it's just so like, I mean, it's just status quo. It's what everyone does. So it's kind of it's easy to forget, because how long do service members spend applauding themselves all day long for the great lengths that you guys do? Not very much time. I don't know really any service member I've spoken to who spends time just patting themselves on the back. You guys are consumed in so much bigger things than being self-focused, which is a beautiful trait, beautiful character trait. And yet that self, we need to warrior on without leaving ourselves behind. I like to say, warrior on without leaving ourselves behind. So remembering that everything you've done, reminding service members in a bulleted list like this, everything that you guys have done to be committed here, without using the word which veterans have been using, indoctrination, but everything you've done to be the biggest, greatest service member you've been. And then looking at and just saying, hey, these are some of the things that in simpleton terms, I mean, that's the retired lieutenant colonel was like, he got all of this. And he also said, and make sure that you continue to fine tune your simple speak, which I do have later on here. And you can see, you have eyes on this. So you can see as I'm talking, you can see some of these bulleted points. Yay.
Yeah. I'm reading through.
Anything that just says, oh, hell no, this is so wrong. This is so far off, Joe. Or anything that you think you could use some work.
So all of them are really good. They, a lot of them are pretty spot on, but they're very generational. So a lot of this is aimed towards, like I would say, 2000, well, I would say anything pre 2018, 2019. Those guys transitioning into civilian world, this applies to them. Some of these issues, the service has been trying to fix over the last few years. And so, like, for example, the lack of sleep, right? Basic trainees now. So when I was in basic training, the drill sergeant just had to make sure that we got a minimum of 4 hours of sleep. That is no longer the case. The soldiers are now granted 7 hours of sleep, which is,
wow.
I don't get 7 hours of sleep in my civilian world. So,
right.
Great.
Because there's so much more stress on service members than someone who goes to work 9 to 5. So that tracks, saying, okay, well,
yeah. So the vigilance, we're a much smaller military right now than what we were, 15 years ago. And so there's a manning issue. And so we're just kind of steadily going through steps, constantly working, constantly just taking care of tasks. But it's not like that. I don't feel that high stress, like vigilance, like, oh, I got to be ready to, fight terrorism at any point in time. Like now you just kind of like, hey, I've got this mission a year from now. I've been planning everything, taking care of all my life before I roll out. But
that's wild. I feel like the world is
it's just like everything's
with conflict right now.
Slowed down a lot. Everything's just slowed down a lot. And it's slowed down a lot in terms of that tactical awareness, but it's heightened in the sense of like just the taskers and all these little things that need to get done, because we used to have so many more people and now we have less people. So it's yeah, go ahead.
I don't think we're on each other's LinkedIn, so I have yet to do my homework in this. I'm so thrilled that you're here. I'm glued to the conversation. I'm on the edge of my seat. Forgive me. Will you remind me what your position is in the command right now?
So I have, for the last year, I've been acting first sergeant as a staff sergeant. Just once again, due to the shortage of manning, I've been filling the role of a first sergeant for the last year. And they actually just got a new staff sergeant coming in. And so now I'm being transitioned to another unit where I'm going to be a lead medic of a hospital, which, it's exciting, different role.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I thought I saw something about a big position that got thrown your way. So you're going to be the lead medic at a hospital.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it'll be a little different, just different things, because as a first sergeant, the soldiers are your well-being, you're taking care of them, all, making sure they're getting paid, getting fed, getting housed, all that stuff. To now it's like just mainly focusing on the operations of the hospital is what I'm doing going forward. So
wild. Okay, I don't want to leave us hanging too far. So this is transferable
Right.
strengths. And I think that you are going to be really, like, you might weigh in on this one, because it's speaking to like, what's a character, a skill, a character trait or a skill that you possess because of your military training. That is a
I'll put my
transferable.
glasses on for this
Oh,
one.
sweet. Thank you. That is a transferable strength to civilian life or to the next post. And I wrote down this is my least thoughtful, although genuinely I put in considerable thought into this. And yet this one, I am just jonesing for more, more insight from you. If you have, I mean, you could tear apart what's here, which there's like a poetic one that says ode to self, meaning like, what is it in this? What's motivating me within this? And I think with it, between the chain of command and there must be, like you said, there's conversations that take place between people. And in those conversations, there must be some level of encouragement, and reminder of, within that constructive criticism, why that person is the person for the task, versus being externally motivated by just doing something because you've got to do it, which looks flimsy on the outside when we do things just because we've got to do them. Everything can seem a little bit contorted or even resentful, but finding, that leadership skill of what's helping you stick to this, also known as that stick-to-itiveness or positive self-determination that can be found within the military life between members. Anything here that you just go, okay, wonder about, or or anything that you just think really needs to be on here as far as transferable strengths go?
No, I mean, for any other fellow Army service member that's reading this, you see a lot of the what we know as the Army values on here. So, integrity, selfless service, courage. These are all things that are kind of the foundation of what it means to be a soldier. And so, when someone is transitioning out, they need to find these things in the civilian world.
Yes. Well, within the self, I mean, just to be reminded of them that you guys, these are the strengths that you've learned versus, it wasn't all bad, to be reminded of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk to a lot of employers now. So one you have on here is discipline. A lot of these employers, they love hiring service members over just the regular Joe Schmo, because your former service members, they show up on time, they show up in the right attire, they're doing everything that is expected to do, and they do it consistently, where most of these younger individuals that come into the workforce, they don't understand discipline.
They've been having their parents write their professors letters on their behalf.
Yeah, just stuff like that. The big one, though, I think for every service member that is transitioning into the civilian life, is selfless service. They finding their purpose. Because you're part of something bigger than you. You're doing something for the what you believe is the betterment of the country and the betterment of the world. And then you get out and you're like, okay, now you might be making decent money as a mechanic at a car dealership, which gives you purpose, but you don't have that big sense of like why I'm here, and so I always talk about with veterans, finding what gives them that feeling again, and it can be anything, and generally it's some form of volunteering, but there's a lot of different opportunities out there for them to find their purpose again.
And it's not what we do, right, Travis? It's not even what we do, it's how we do it. How we do it. It's the attention we bring to the task, which is, that is a beautiful example of a transferable strength, and how to frame it exactly in words is still an exploration of mine in this active moment. That increased level of attention that's brought to any task, because in the military, oftentimes, not always, some things are menial, like in everything else. No task is too big, no task is too small. So it might be mopping the floor, but beyond that, even that, actually, if you're mopping a floor on a ship that has people going in hectic circumstances and really pacing quickly down that hallway and they slip, you're not just sending someone home for a week, you're possibly sinking the ship one way or another. That person might be instrumental in communications, and now they're incapable of delivering said communications in the way it's proficient. Stuff like that. So increased attention to detail, extended attention. Okay, we'll play with it later. I'll watch this. I will watch this. So nothing is problematic here that you see here.
No, these are all, like I said, I would say for any branch of service, these are the core values of what it means to be a service member. So you're doing great.
Cool, thank you. Well, okay, this is the work. This is the warrior on without leaving yourself behind work. This is creating what I call a reconnection modality. Because remember, trauma, as psychologists frame it, is a disconnection from the self. So reconnection modality is how I've started to frame it. And so there's 5. There are 90 slides. We're on 16 because you're so prolific in both your dedication and interest to the topic. So if you're comfortable with it, and we're going to skip some slides because I can ad lib in an abbreviation. The 5 identity association definitions. Do you want to read this out loud? We can take turns. You do one, I do one. Pretty much like that.
Yeah, sure. Whatever. I mean, as you probably realize at this point, I talk too much. So,
oh no, no, not the message I'm trying to send at all. This is all periphery. If you have it, this is to spur our conversation. So I want, there's no interrupting, there's contributing.
Yeah,
okay.
No, cue cards are good for me to keep me on point. So, but yeah, I can go ahead and start with this first one and just kind of get the ball rolling. Does that sound good?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So we got service identity. So this identity association relates the external world and our relationship to it at large. For example, service member, teacher, provider, visionary, mechanic, engineer, mother, father, sister, brother, breadwinner, dependent, etc. This aspect of identity helps one to function within one's crafted existence in this world through acceptance of what it is, although rarely to never is the totality of who someone is.
I feel a lot of service members getting stuck here in the transition period of, I'm a Marine, or I'm a soldier, that's who I am, or I'm a sailor, I'm a guardsman, I'm a coastie, that's who I am, I'm an airman. And so learning to gauge ourselves. So quick aside, the 5 identity associations, surface being one of 5, there's nothing negative or positive. They're neutral. They're neutral. All 5, even as you read them, you might go, oh, this isn't good. I see these words, loaded word. All of them are neutral. It's how we are then able to address ourselves, to reconnect, because there is no blatant negative judgment about self as we encounter ourselves with this work. So in simple speak, this form of identity association relates to the external world and our relationship to it, although rarely to never is the totality of who someone is. How we relate to the world by way of our chosen or assigned roles and titles. And what I think I really need to add there, and it's the first time in doing this a dozen times now, which isn't a lot, but how we relate to ourselves and the world by way of our chosen or assigned roles and titles. So I'm going to give an ad lib. So in the middle of my junior year, I was pulled out of high school by my mother in Virginia. And she had decided that she wanted to move to Florida It was like a dream of hers. She had lived in Florida before she was married and before she had kids, and she decided that that was the time. And so I went to St. Pete, Florida, and knowing no one, but knowing myself enough that when they told my twin sister and me at the school board that even though we had good enough grades, the curriculum was vastly different. So in Florida, we would, as pertaining to that curriculum, we'd have to go back to the beginning of sophomore year, which would extend our high school education by an additional year and a half. And we knew enough about public school that we made the executive decision that wasn't what we were going to do. So I got my GED, and then I started hustling, and I started working on getting into this fine art school that is a vein of NYU in New York City. And I got in, one of 500 people worldwide. People are scrambling to get in there, got in. And from there, just spent the last 22 years in higher education. So that's just to speak to the point that I might have identified myself as a high school dropout, that title or role. That is a role. We all play our roles.
Mhm.
So all of it's true. And yet when we think and we perceive ourselves beyond how we're framed within a title or a role, we're able to exceed how we find ourselves within our lives in the world at large. If that's not too convoluted of a sentence to follow. Questions, wonderings, anything you're wondering about?
No, you're doing great.
Okay. So you can go to my LinkedIn and see the schools I've gone to. We don't need to talk about those. So then I know I need, as the retired Lieutenant Colonel said from the Air Force, slidesmanship. So this slide needs to be a little more fine-tuned. The colors are all over the place. However, to me, it looks like a spring day, green, brown, yellow, green grass, bright sun, earthy trees. So I have on the left side, bright side. And again, I am looking forward to the tactical neuroscience, Justin Smith coming in and giving me some idea of how to best frame up this work in visuals, pie graphs and stuff like that. So the bright side, and then the areas of potential alarm, as it pertains to as we self-identify, as we relate with ourselves. This says not relying on anything else in the world except for our relationship with ourselves. That's where it starts. The bright side. So if I'm focusing and fixated on, remember that, this is the bright side, this is the sunny side of my service identity. I certainly have a sense of certainty. I certainly was a high school dropout. That I knew. And that's the bright side. I knew that. There was no denial of it. There wasn't too much grief. There was an acceptance. And that certainty can be a winning moment. In that, tied into certainty is that acceptance. Belonging. So I could have joined a group of people who were lamenting having dropped out of high school or been forced to. The courage to be who you are, or at least what we think we are. So I'm challenging the bright side a little bit, because as I say that, we're edging into the potential areas for harm as everyone reads it. I wrote alarm, but everyone writes harm. Do you want to read those?
As far as
Self-deception.
under self-deception there?
Mm-hmm. Self-doubt.
Yeah, so self-sabotage, restrictive, righteousness. I have to agree with the Colonel. This is a hard slide to read.
Any wonderings about this? The content, once we can get past being blindsided by this bright sunny day we're looking at? Which now I'm inspired to change, because you're the second.
Yeah,
well,
it's I don't know how it's
let's say restrictive righteousness. So Grace, she married an Air Force person. She's up in North Carolina at Air Force Base, living there. bless her heart, with her spouse to support her spouse on the base. And she goes, what's restrictive righteousness? Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean by that? So restrictive righteousness, meaning that I could have just said, no, being righteous, like I am a high school dropout and that's my assignment and that's who I am and that's the cards I've been dealt and that's who I am, so that's who I will be. Being
Yeah.
overly righteous about who we are as framed by being limited by overly identifying with our roles and titles. And how
Yeah, we
restrictive.
definitely with veterans, we definitely see a lot of self-sabotage. I don't know why. We're still trying to figure out the why, but they can have a lot of good things going. Things are moving in the right direction. And then they just do something to just break it all down. And I
It's that belief of not believing that one is good. And if a career was built possibly, now this, Travis, I know, this is dated, I know. There has to be tough love in the military at boot camp, especially. And if there was some kind, if there's reiteration, or let's say that just subconsciously the harsh conditions that is the military might send a subconscious message that one is unworthy of nice, good things in life. So that's a hard one to crunch on because the military has all those transferable strengths and high points like education, having a tribe, having your VA home loan. So no money down, you can get a house in this very expensive country we live in.
yeah.
So hard to crunch on and yet totally breakable. We can break down all self-relational issues through mere belief and desire and follow through in how we're going to practice the reconnective modality. So the willingness to look at oneself and inquire. That's what the identity association model is 100% jumping towards, leaping towards. That's that onus, as you said, is on the person. And yet having like a practical skill, a tool to start to self-inquire is of the essence in a successful, in creating a successful realm, a successful space to enter. So two of 5, transgressional identity, neither good nor bad, neither negative nor positive, all are neutral. This identity association, and then I'm going to give you the next one to do it. Or would you read this one actually? Because then I could take away the rest, expedite, so we get to talk more.
That's totally fine. So this identity association is the one that people regress toward in order to please a former construct of oneself as is related to one's nuclear family and or original prominent life experiences such as service years, and is often engaged within the self for the perceived sake of survival.
Take a breath with that one in our bellies. Wonderings.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like what we talked about before. You know, you're figuring out what your identity is, and then you're trying to, like you said, regress and please former self or organization or what it may be. So it's interesting.
My life experience with transgressional is vast because as human beings, you and I, we've been on the planet long enough to have lots of material to work with. Lots of different formative experiences, whether it be boot camp or being raised with our family members, our nuclear family members. One prominent life experience I had is somewhat of a parallel with military life in that there's a certain level of aestheticism. So being ascetic. So withdrawing from creature comforts and pleasures. So as a yogi in my training and having lived at a Zen monastery. You wake up at 4 a.m., you do the group exercises, physical exercises, meditation. You have time to do your basics, and then you go off to training. I would walk a couple miles, not a big deal. I was raised by a World War II veteran, so we were always expected as kids, you walk to the bus stop. Doesn't matter if it's snowing, raining, you will walk. So point being, in that aestheticism, that withdrawal from a lot of the creature comforts, or there's a parallel I see with the military in that there is also a withdrawal from a lot of the things that we take for granted, like being in close proximity to friends and family. There's even a philosophical vantage point as being a yogi that attachment is a negative. So being overly attached to anyone, relationally even. And there's a lot of challenging of personal relationships when in the military, obviously, because of just proximity issues. And you're not close by geographically. There's not the accessibility to loved ones that there was. And there's that yearning and that desiring for that close proximity that is kindled with your peers. Hallelujah. And yet nothing quite replaces those kindred spirits of those formative years, those people in our lives. And there's this time where suddenly reintegration, we have access to all these things, holy overload. Now you have access to everything you want to have access to. It just doesn't make sense in an experiential way, unless it does, unless we're doing that work, that reconnection modality, that is this tool of just accessing ourselves, inquiring of ourselves. What's sticky here for me? What's challenging? Because it's in that inquiry that answers come, and with the answer, a shift comes. So, and it's all inward, but then it impacts and affects our ability to engage our lives in the ways that we really want to without self-sabotaging. If we can be aware of who we're trying to placate or these people, as you know, it's like the ghosts of time, because these people who we're trying to please are no longer there. Whether it's our nuclear family, they don't walk with us every day. Well, some people are still with their nuclear family in their hometown, for sure. But a lot of us, we go on. We're our own agents. We need to be self-referential, and we need to remember the ghosts of time to our advantage, if you will. And they could be actual people or not. They could be people we know really well, or kind of just were very influential and passed in and out of our life. We need to just recognize where we're coming from within ourselves in order to shift. And so the simpletons speak of this. Just to repeat what Travis just read, this identity association is regressed toward in order to please a former construct of self as is related to one's original upbringing or prominent life experiences. Simple speak, resorting to what is considered most normal or acceptable at the potential expense of one's own growth. This is the work. I mean, so I learned part of my I gave an example for this one. So I'm off the hook. Now we can skip through these trainings. See, this is yogi. This is yogi me. Don't I look just completely like I need to get out in the world and just actually breathe in life instead of just doing my breathing exercises? And me as a 16-year-old, both living up to words, sunburn, perfect hair. You know, the magazines told me that I was lovable and valuable and worthy only if I did XYZ. And the monastery and the yoga, the Zen monastery and the yogic 8.5 years, it was not only my bread and butter, it was everything I lived and breathed being a yogi. I took it to heart. My job was to be of service to people and to help bring their best self to them. In the groups that I would facilitate day in and day out, not just at community centers and studios, but at corporations, police training centers. Okay, here we go. We're getting onto this one, and this one might spur some interesting. So we're at that slide again where we go left side is the bright side, The right side is areas for potential alarm, as is related to transgressional identity, which Travis and I have both defined here.
So you got the traditional values oriented, wanting to make others happy and can be easier to fit in. Okay. And then your alarms can be back to the self-sabotage, the self-neglect, the cowardice, self-betrayal, and complacency. Okay.
And easier to fit in on the bright side, AKA belonging. It's difficult to be the one who goes against the grain all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet, it's a beautiful thing when we have that commonality amongst people and no one's challenging anything. And that's very comfortable and lovely and comforting. And if no longer resonating most truthfully with the person living inside of us all day, all night long, that observer of our lives, it can resort, transgressional identity might resort to complacency, self-neglect, self-sabotage, cowardice, self-betrayal. There's that word again, self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Okay. Compass identity.
Am I going this time?
Sure.
All right. So this identity association relates to the scope of one's interpretation of the world as it is related to one's spirituality, religion, and or personal guiding beliefs, including one's indoctrination and how that plays out in each of our lives.
By learning these identity associations, we are literally dipping a toe into the vast sea of this work. And that's what I more and more realize the more I go over this, is that you're just learning we're learning how to find ourselves within these. We're relating to each of these identity associations. We're currently on number 35. And actually what the retired Lieutenant Colonel Terry Courtney, he said in Oklahoma, cool clip on Facebook. He has like this, he showed this rotating door that looks like a secret like tunnel. It looks like a Washington, DC, like, or Dan Brown, the lost, what's it called? The lost symbol? Lost pyramid? Lost symbol?
I remember that one. I've read the other ones, but I don't remember that one.
Did you ever read one where it talks about like the tunnels underground that exist all over or something? These secret portals.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's a nice analogy of this work, is bringing it home to the fact that like we bury stuff. There are access portals or hallways to ourselves. This work is one. Relating with the work, interacting with the work. Right now, we're just learning about it. And knowledge is not power. Does Dale Carnegie say this? Knowledge is not power. Knowledge applied is power. So interacting with this work is actually where the magic happens. Simple Speak with Compass is how we shape our personal experience of the world through our religious selves, our beliefs, and indoctrination. We revisit some of the, for instance, my selling my car and moving to a different country so that I could become a yoga teacher, because my spiritual guidance self was that was what I needed to do. So in selling the car and really, really stripping myself of a lot of these niceties, and in that, I started to look more at who am I as a total human being. And we will get, what I really am excited to get to are, again, the left and the right columns for this. Because, and it's not, there's no negative or positive. It's all neutral. We get to decide. Of course, there's negative and positive that's potentiated, or we get to discern, we get to choose where we take our inner dialogue. But I've learned that I cannot identify with the construct of a world largely uncreated by me and then expect to be who I am or become who I want to be. We're speaking spirituality now. We're speaking beyond what the eyes can see. I cannot overly identify with labels and practices uncreated by me and then expect to fulfill my fullest potential. as a whole, we cannot identify with and act within roles undreamt by us and then expect to fill our shoes day in and day out in a way that feels good to us. So then what I said was, okay, what I'm speaking to there is that I was indoctrinated with the Zen monastery ethos. And I stripped myself willingly as a test of who am I really? If I'm not these niceties and these amazing life experiences that I had had up until these really rare life experiences that I had leading up to my yoga teacher training in British Columbia. And my whole point is that as I started to notice that I was following an indoctrination rather than really inquiring, what do I think and believe to be true? And of course, yes, the pendulum needs to swing very much one way, completely opposite way, in order for us to meet ourselves in the middle. Sometimes we need to experience ourselves in extremes. This work is so that we are more safeguarded from staying and living within extremes to an extent where our life has lessened value. So what I started to sprinkle in there was, hey, I'm worthy of living a full life. I can have these things. I can be comfortable. I can have clothes that I feel actually comfortable in. I can have a nice vehicle that I feel safe in, and I can still contribute to the world. It doesn't have to be so bare bones. So in a way, my self-saboteur had to take a back seat. We are almost at 4 or 5. The left and right columns of compass identity, the bright side and the areas for potential alarm. And Travis, if you want to take it away, it's the same.
Yeah. So we're looking at, you have a feeling of belief in being supported by something bigger, faithfulness, trust in the world, God, universe, divine, higher power, whatever it may be. And then you have these things that may come up of your loss of anatomy or resignation, your lessened originality due to blind following, fear of the unknown due to over idealization. So
sometimes we can hand too much over to a power greater than us, like God. And yet it says that God helps those who help themselves. So when we meet ourselves and do our inner work, we're showing up in a way that meets halfway. And so, yeah, loss of autonomy or resignation. I was close. I never lost my autonomy with that yoga teacher training. That owner of the school asked me if I wanted, so what are you doing? Do you want to come and teach with this school? And I just thought, I didn't want to just adhere to one vantage point of life. I wanted to go and I wanted to experience these different facilitators, these different trainers. And that's what I did. I went and I studied with these different veins of interpretation around the same subject so that I could come out stronger in orienting myself toward a combination of all of my experiential findings to best represent an authentic version of who we are. Interwoven identity. Do you want to take this away again? Do you want me to read it?
Go ahead. I'll let you have this one.
Interwoven. So we see those words, those sticky words. It's not, there's nothing inherently negative or positive about any of these identity associations, these 5: surface, transgressional, compass, interwoven, where we are now. And then the last one is impact. So here at interwoven is when one's pain and or grief, which is attached to a personal incident, experience, or tragedy, is so defining that the survivor's total way of being is lived from either a reactionary, that would be on the negative end, because if we don't have our wits about us, how effective will we be if we're reacting without pause? Or highly responsive state. That is a positive. So within the identity, It's self-ascertaining. When we can identify, gosh, I feel really heavy with grief right now. What is the grief about? Of course, got to figure that out. What can I do to feel better? It sounds like a simple, simpleton way of looking at it. Ultimately, what can I do to feel better? So this quote I remember, and I wish I remembered the author. So it's totally Googleable. And it's something to the effect of, my happiness is a direct result of whether or not I'm living within my values. And I thought, well, doesn't that just boil it down and make it sound so simple? And we have some more quotes coming up that address that. However, and, oh, ding, 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 listen to the word, my values, whether or not I'm living in line with my values. So there's no hierarchy of values here. It's whatever our personal values are, our independent values. There's no right or wrong. So if we're living, I mean, we have psychopathic killers and they go into civilian world and without any regard, they can look very happy, viciously happy in doing what is being done. So of course there's a light and dark side to this, but we ultimately, a genuine state of happiness is a sense of overall well-being. And we feel well-being when we're cultivating and safeguarding life and all that is in life. Like when you went down to El Salvador, did you say?
Correct.
And you went on a mission and you helped serve El Salvadorans with amplifying their economy in some way?
Yeah, we built clinics, schools, you know, the necessary infrastructure that you would hope they would have. So, yeah.
Make life more traversable, not only within their country, but within the world at large, opening up a lot of doors. Okay, simple speak, Travis, living as a result, and this is interwoven, living as a result of a challenging event, whether that be negative or positive. We all have challenging events and we all need to live as a result of them. So what kind of a result are we going to live with them? What's the result going to be? What's the nature of the result going to be? What's the nature of our approach to the echo effects of the challenge, no matter how great or small? So I give an example here about being a cancer survivor and having to fight for getting that surgery because my doctor said nothing was wrong, nothing needed to go. And I knew by how I felt at my 35 years of life, I think I was, that it needed to go. So I fought for it to go. And in so doing, I had a choice. I could have, well, I fought for it to go. And case in point, they then said, ooh, we biopsied what you had us remove and insisted that we removed. And lo and behold, we can't guarantee you have 5 years to live unless you come back and you get a second surgery. We have to open you up in the same place a second time. Talk about traumatic. Talk about a challenging life moment. And I had the choice of how I was going to perceive all of that, how I was going to live from there. Reactionary or highly responsive. I chose the latter. I chose highly responsive. And by doing that, what do I mean? A couple of examples. I had a training in Washington, D.C. that I had planned for before the diagnosis. They told me I shouldn't go. I knew nothing was going to change if I waited a month or not. So I went a month later after I completed my training. That was highly responsive versus reactionary. I could have also technically probably sued the surgeon, the practice, because they didn't take it out when I asked, and then I insisted and insisted, and then it was very traumatic. I mean, to have to open up the same place twice, none of that had to happen. Technically, they would have just put a stitch in and just biopsied a little bit and would have been able to ascertain what needed to be done. So you see the point. The narratives are very important. It's changed my life for the best. I now take better care of myself than I ever have. So through engaging, case in point, the identity association model, so the I am for transition, all life transitions, health-oriented, career-oriented, family-oriented, whatever it is, there's an assimilation of self. An assimilation of self. So a marrying of our parts to greater levels, the potential for it, if we're inquiring of ourselves. So essentially practicing the I am lengthens our response time and more quickly shortens negative reaction time, because we're online, we're asking ourselves what's going on with the intent of living on the bright side. Then all is in motion for creating a great life. Interwoven. We have the bright side, we have the areas for potential alarm. So I'll give you impact. I'll tip my hat to you for impact and see if you want to do that. And I'll conclude this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Interwoven identity, bright side, possibility mindfully express, because we can mindfully express only when we take time to respond. Chance to practice self-observation, because again, we're inquiring, which we might say for all of them. However, this is to greater levels because the content is heavier. We're looking at observing ourselves through a time of great unease or difficulty. And the opportunity to become curious and modify one's go-to ways, because the option within this self-reflection piece, this facet of ourselves, is to be highly responsive. It's there for all of us. It's not easy. Sometimes it can take years to rectify. It's there for all of us. I mean, I think about like Gandhi, and I think about Nelson Mandela, like wholly responsive. I mean, he made a life off of being responsive and a whole movement versus reactionary. And like you said, even the military, the American military itself is focused now on prevention, which is solutions, not the problem, solutions.
Mm-hmm.
There's not like a big monster in the room that's untamable. These are human beings, and human beings are, by and large, our service members are really amazing. Selfless service at the heart of a lot of it. So totally teachable. So if entangled in the negatives of interwoven identity, there's a sense of loss of self-control. If too enmeshed, again, being reactionary, that tracks. Feeling of being ashamed because woe is me, quote unquote, when one might go to say, I'm the only one who's in pain here. I'm the only one who's suffering. No. So feeling of being ashamed, hopeless, powerless, or victimization. Now we get to close the door on interwoven identity and shift onto the topic of a much more seemingly simplistic one, impact identity. Might you read this one?
Yeah. So the identity association causes us to lead our lives as a byproduct of how we think, we influence the spaces that we occupy. This might be relating to the personal or the career aspects of our lives, how we think we are perceived by the people around us, and can be a motivating factor in how we lead our lives.
What do you read there? What do you see being said? In plain speak.
In simple speak. So, it goes, well, I keep wanting to say, our identification and, a service member, they might identify, the byproduct of both positive and negatives. The byproduct is that they're a more disciplined individual and they are more resilient in some cases, and they don't necessarily need help. And then on the negative side is like, they don't ask for help. They don't, they lose that sense of identity. So I can see where the bright and yellow entanglements will come up here in a second. So
Beautiful. Simple speak, living our lives as a byproduct of how we perceive, we relate to ourselves and ultimately the world. If I think I always fuck myself up. Like, that's just how it is in this scenario. I'm gonna screw it up. That's going to impact. So it's not negative or positive. That's more on the end of obviously a very more sticky or challenging self identification or perception. And we have lots of positives, of course. So I give an example of mine where Virginia, Florida, New York, worked at fine dining restaurants. And I really, 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 really identified with that. I really identified with working at restaurants, fine dining restaurants. That's what I knew. That's what I did. 3 different states from 15 to 18, 19, 15 to 19, almost 19. And then I wondered about that and switched. I just started wanting to know what I really liked. Typical 19-year-old stuff, 20-year-old stuff. So my self-perception expanded. I started to look at, well, what is it that I like about working at restaurants? It's that interaction with people. It's being able to study people. It's watching people. It's like, people watching when you go travel, you're at the airports.
well, I'm guilty of people watching at the airport. Yeah, 100%.
Best. It's either that or the TV on rerun hanging over your head. Or you could bring a book, of course. That's also an option. Okay, we get the gist. Left, right, here we are. We're ending the focus on the introduction of these impact identities, or rather identity associations with impact identity. So the bright side, like you were speaking to, verve, enthusiasm, you get a heck of a lot done. Introspectiveness, you know who you are because you're sitting there tracking how are people reacting to me? Do I want more of that? Do I want less of that? How can I finesse my approach? Great. Self-encouragement, possibility mindset, sense of interconnectedness, because I'm focused on more than myself, just like our service members. The downside, insecurity, because every move in this situation, when I identify with myself in this identity association capacity, insecurity, everything is being moved toward, well, how's someone else going to perceive this? And how secure in myself might I be if everything has to do with outside praise or validation? Omittance of self, downside, because then there is no autonomous self there. Uncentered, uprooted from original intent or purpose, self-consumed, unoriginal, inauthentic. Nothing anyone in this room struggles with. Hallelujah. However, we are human beings, and certainly I can feel these words in my heart and soul, and I can feel the bright side words in my heart and soul. They came from my heart and soul because know thyself, right?
Yeah.
So we visit these places. That's the whole point. We visit these places. Okay, here we get into bringing in. This is the part where bringing in other people's work that speaks to this practice, this reconnection modality that is identity associations. And we have 30 minutes because there's been so much talk. So here's my question. Do we just keep going as far as we can into the last 30 minutes, or do we log on? Do we go for another 5 minutes, conclude, and maybe log on at a different time so you get the benefit of having more relationship with and context with everything you've spent your time being invested in the last hour.
So, unfortunately, as much as I want to keep going and not break this connection, I actually have a barracks buddy while I'm at the schoolhouse right now. And I told him to give me 90 minutes. So he's going to be back here in 3. So we'll probably just have to wrap this up, take a pause, and then pick this up at another time.
Oh, I'd love that, Travis. That sounds awesome. Wait, a barracks buddy? Do tell.
Yeah.
It can
Roommate is random stranger roommate that I have while I'm in the school. So
oh, so y'all aren't assigned to do something together, like activity wise, but he's coming to enjoy having a place to rest his head and read in a quiet time.
as it's almost 8:30 here. Yep. So
I got you. Okay, a bunkmate. Well, not like a bunkmate.
yeah,
but...
I was gonna go right there, but you know. He
Okay.
has his own bed. So let's just establish that right now. He has his own bed.
Now
He's gonna
I'm
sleep
like,
in that bed by himself.
now I'm blushing at this. Okay. Now, let's, yeah, I would love to reconnect. So just like rest and digest.
Yep, absolutely. We'll just do a quick recap when we get back together, and then we'll pick up where we left off. Does that work for you?
Yes, quick recap just over the 5 identity associations, because all the other stuff that's easy stuff. We'll just revisit the 5 definitions and then get back on to slide 52. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yay! Okay, let's I'll message you to check in, and I'll chat with you soon.
All right, sounds good. Great job.
Aloha. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me and recircling back 4 years later by mere request. Thank you. That is the heart of our military.
Yeah.
This service, wanting to be a part of something that is beyond, frankly, you and me. I grow with this work. So, okay. I'll chat with you soon. Bye, Travis.
Bye. Goodbye.